We're live?
Yeah, we're live.
I did get our old...
You're like, am I live? Am I not live?
Yeah,
If
all
you've
right.
been before, you probably know what I'm talking about.
I did get our MP3 from our old music downloaded. I went into the office, I was, did all my COVID health checks, went in and got our audio file. So we're gradually restoring our production capability. There'll be a green screen eventually behind me. Right now you got the cheesy white screen. Todd's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, it wasn't quite ready, but it's hiding the ugly closet. It's better than nothing. All right.
I'm drying his laundry.
Demo heavy show today. Todd's up first. We decided we couldn't fit them both in, so I'm up and you're next week, but I'm gonna have to have part 2 of next week, right? And there was some news you wanted to cover first, and I got one small news thing, but that's about it.
Yeah, I'll try and actually, it's interesting. I've got some Power Automate desktop and some Power BI stuff, and it's actually highly detailed stuff. So I'm not gonna go through every point, but this is just like, if you like features, this is the week for you, because this is like
remember
feature heavy.
My demo is the content publishing, the programmatic publishing generation of news pages based off of a SharePoint list to the front end Power App. I have basic versions of this out there right now, and I have crawl, walk, run versions of this I'll be posting to GitHub. So this version will be up on GitHub later today at aka.ms/DougCode. So that one will be out there, and we can put it in the show notes. But I decided the big one was just too much for people to take in at first. So I made a really small one, and we're going to walk through and deconstruct that one today and really understand the pieces. And then we'll sort of build on it like layers, right? And make it something amazing. So, Mr. Kidda, you're up first.
Like an ogre, right?
I was going to say it. It's a great movie. Ogres have layers.
It really is.
Have layers. And
some of
the developers who used to work for me would probably tell you that that I write code like an ogre, with ogre-like quality.
But at least they didn't say you were a manager like an ogre.
That would be sad. All right, fire it up.
All right, Power Automate Desktop, October 2020 update. Feature heavy. All right, so man, this is just, I wouldn't say there's any big themes here aside from clearly the developers are banging away at the backlog. That's the message I take away here. So error notifications, better notifications of errors happening. So if things have been kind of hiding, you're like, what's failing? I don't know. Things get surfaced up a little better. I thought this one was interesting with no explanation. Invalid path characters are now allowed in flow lanes. Enough said. I think it was an interesting. I would love to have heard the discussions around that one. I like this one for me because performance in the desktop is still evolving. It's new. I don't expect it to be amazingly performant, but caching is now available for flows. So that's great. So they don't have to be downloaded each time. The run history provides specific subflow information. So when you're doing UI flows, you're probably going to have some subflows. So to be able to kind of drill in and see and kind of debug what's happening in those subflows is really good. Action parameters are now grouped to improve efficiency during configuration. So kind of making things just easier to use, UI refinement, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to read through the rest of these because I don't want to, as you say, drain the slide here, but there's some really good stuff. More SA stuff.
But can you double click on it? Can you?
I can drill in and we can have a follow-up to talk about synergies.
Can we really explore the synergies and re-envision what's possible? All right, keep going.
Stop. I will end this stream right now. All right. I love this time of the week that we do this because we both have we always have long weeks. Everyone has long weeks, but we're just kind of squirrely and looking to have.
Yeah, filters are off on Fridays with Flash Friday, right? It's like just whatever.
That's right.
If you want to know something, ask in the comments. Todd's probably watching them at some point.
That's right. All right. So, this one is amazing. All right. Anyone that's been around Microsoft BI for a long time, right? You probably remember ProClarity. Remember them? If you don't, little history, go look them up. But they actually had a feature like this. This was an acquisition Microsoft made 14 years ago, and we've now redelivered the feature. Personalized visuals is now generally available, both in the desktop. There's some information in the desktop I want to cover in a minute, but obviously from a consumer perspective is where the magic is. So being able to change the visualization type. I have a stacked bar. I want to see this as an area chart.
Hey, Todd, I'm still seeing the Power Automate from you.
let me unshare and reshare my screen, and we will try that.
Okay, I'm gonna cut over to logo just so we
a little behind the scenes here. Are you ready for me to share my screen again? I'm gonna click screen 1.
Stand by. I gotta come out of do not disturb if we're gonna do that though, right? So the yeah, all right. So it's one of those days apparently. We're just gonna come over to here.
Will our humor make up for our technical difficulties?
Yeah, exactly. I should have one of those little things. You know, please stand by. I will add a text. I'm available to receive a share now if you want.
Okay, let me stop. Uh-oh, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Wow, we haven't had one this bad in a while. All right, so I'm sharing my screen with you.
So here comes content from Todd.
Can you see it?
It'll be there in a moment. 1 second while Doug does production on screen. Todd was saying he might want to do some production duties. I'm like, are you 100% certain that you'd like to do that right now?
Maybe just.
How do you feel about that? Look at that. Power BI on the air. All right, so we're good.
Who knows what happened there? My screen share.
That's all right. Let's just roll.
Whatevs. All right. So being able to change your visualization type as a consumer, that's so powerful because, I mean, frankly, I feel like sometimes there is a best visual to communicate an idea. Sometimes maybe there's two and it's personal preference. And that is so okay. Like maybe your brain just reads a bar chart, stacked bar better than an area chart, or maybe it communicates a different idea. No, you know, I don't think there's any judgment there either way. But you now have the ability to do this. So swapping out a measure of dimension, right? So comparing, you maybe you know, a particular maybe sales versus units sold, right? But I want to look at that over the same dimensions. I can swap those out. Add or removing a legend. That's kind of self-explanatory. I like this one, comparing different measures, right? Pulling those in. This is so amazing, and it's one of those where I'm like, how have we gotten away with not having this so far? This is just showing, you know, such a power of the tool, and you know, it speaks to data and analytics for everyone. You know, there's such a wide spectrum of what individual humans are going to be doing with data in your organization. While you may not be the person building the spreadsheet, building the Power BI model, or even building the report, you certainly may want to be able to tweak things and swap things out and answer questions that you may not have been able to do that. Not only that, but this cuts down on the number of reports, right? In the past, how many if I even report developers on here, right? I'm sure they can attest to the fact that, well, we need another report with that, but we need it with gross margin as a line chart. It's like, okay, no, do it yourself, right? So
yeah, you know, it's interesting in my current job, like there's a whole bunch of, I get access to a whole bunch of data science people on the back end, right? Because it's cross solution is kind of, if you looked in my title, change. But how they present these interesting models, but it's up to me to decide the visualization and draw the insights from, right? There's amazing like foundational stuff, but then I got to be able to apply rationalized patterns against the outcome. Right. It's amazing. So knowledge of how to do this and be able to tweak it so your brain can wrap around it is super important.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the data scientists like tables with color coding. Like, just, nope. Just, hey, like, I mean, like, we have like 200 rows, and I'll be staring at it.
But it's amazed me how someone's different brain will either be more receptive to a particular visualization or storytelling technique. It's just wild. So you need to have that choice there. And to speak to the different brains, because we all have different ones.
Yeah, I definitely needed a few different visuals, so spot on. We'll just leave it at that.
I'll draw you a picture, Doug.
See, that's what I like.
Yeah, exactly. So here's, and not only that, but when you get it when you get it to the way that you like it, your personalized view, you create a personal bookmark and save it and come back to it. I absolutely love that. That's fantastic. Share, you can even share those changes out. And there's more information here too about like, okay, if you're the creator, what can you allow or not allow your users to do? That's all in here as well. So take a look at that. And guess what? It's also time for the new Power BI desktop version. So super pumped about this one. A couple ones in here where, you know, speaking of things where you're like, wow, I can't believe we just kind of did that. But that's okay. It's making the product better and better and better. Guided watermarks in the report. So before you get the splash screen, otherwise, if you turn the splash screen off inside Power BI Desktop, you just get this big blank thing staring you in the face. Well, what do I do? How do I get started? Now we're kind of saying like, okay, well, before you create a report, you got to add some data, right? Well, now that you've added some data, build some visuals. Okay. I think this is really just a small touch kind of thing, but for new users, I've talked often before about, Power BI is a pretty mature platform at this point, kind of 5-6 years in. So if you're a new user ramping into Power BI, which is a very mature, robust platform at this point, you need all the help you can get. So this was another one where I'm just so pumped about. We added a sample data set in, right? So if you're just trying to get started and you're just trying to learn, this is, I think, brilliant, because there's no better way
to go find some data. And they can build examples around it and all that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I'm looking at this and saying, because I actually do a lot of kind of hands-on things with like middle schoolers and high schoolers. So this is maybe going to make my life easier as well, using sample data sets. So pretty cool. Pretty excited about that one. We already talked about personalized visuals being generally available. Let me slow down. This goes into a little more detail. I'll let that be an exercise for the reader of how that works. Here's another one though, as part of that, don't summarize. So and this one could be useful, I imagine, if the model developer, the original creator of the data set, didn't complete their job and maybe set some of the fields to don't summarize. So like a year, for example, that's an integer, but you should never add up 2019 plus 2020. So that should always be set to don't summarize. If that's a thing that you need to do, you can save that now. So that's really nice.
That's nice. Yeah. Maybe they didn't care about that dimension, but you do. So they didn't fix it.
Exactly. So a bunch of other, I want to make sure, Doug, you have time for your demo. But also I'll just talk about one more thing and let everyone else read everything else here. But dynamic M query parameters. Okay, that's pretty nerdy. What the heck is that? So this allows you to, parameters have been in Power BI Desktop for some time. I don't know, several years at this point. Really useful for allowing users to dynamically bring in data or just dynamically do things when they open up a new PBIX file or PBIT file for that matter. Now you're able to use those parameters to affect the query during direct query. So if your data is being queried back to like SQL or MySQL or MariaDB, which is now available as of this month in direct query, you can pass those parameters to every statement that gets run against that direct query. So for example, that's really useful if it's like, I only care about the things that happened between in the year 2020 or in this year or for this particular brand. So it's actually helping you build a more performant application as well. So really exciting. A bunch of cool stuff in here, but I don't want to read this to death. And then finally, this is a heads up, right, for you admins out there. The new look is coming, right? We've been talking about this for a while, but it's going to begin rolling out next week and be generally available to all tenants and users in early November. So
this time we mean it, though. That's the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Serious.
So this is definitely one you should be looking at if you're an admin. Change management, get ready, and be ready for this. So Doug, I want to give you a few minutes because I know you have some news and a demo. So I'll hand it over to you, sir.
I do. I have. I'm just gonna get my desktop. Hear me? Check.
You're back. You're back.
Yeah, well, it's audio transitions as we go through things, right? So the
you're a little nervous there. My heart's
no, it's all good. It's all good. Even if so, it wouldn't really, be the end of the earth, would it? Now, okay. So hopefully you can now see on screen some flow. Here's how I built this environment. First, let's talk about the goal. The goal is to allow. This is a beautiful SharePoint site, right? One of the nice responsive templates that come if you sign up for the Office Developer Program and you get a fresh tenant. That's how I chose to build this environment. It's an entirely fresh Office developer tenant. Added in the demo users and the landing content pack. So if you want to follow along with this exercise, that's exactly where you can start. You can start from a known state. I realized all my other environments had way too much pro in them, and I was unwinding all sorts of stuff, so it wasn't necessarily clear. Then I added a page called Customer Stories to the landing. It is simply a page. This is just a regular old SharePoint page, and you'll notice there is nothing in it yet. Because what we want to do is our goal would be to get stories from our field, from our users, and put them up. But as we lay out the challenge on top of it, if I were to go in and say to my users that they wanted to do a new page, right? And let's just say that we wanted to do, it doesn't really matter. We'll pick this one. Here's our template that we have. Well, let's pick the customer story template. So you can see we got these different stories that are over here. They're empty, right? I mean, there's nothing really to them. So if I gave that to one of my field technicians and said, please go create a SharePoint page, they'd have to get in front of a browser, get on top of that content, and then format the page to make it look nice. Agreed?
Yes.
And most of end users are not great desktop publishers, particularly if they're in a hurry, right? They'll put the content out. Also, what about additional metadata we might want to gather, like which product was it, what office produced it, what industry was it for? We want to get some taxonomy around this so that we can do audience targeting and apply metadata to these pages. But if you ask the user, please go create the page, go to page details, fill out the metadata, it's not going to happen. Can we all agree? It's just not. The usability, consistency, there's no ability to route for approvals. But the goal is that we would have nice looking pages that follow a standardized framework, and we get these created and placed on the site. So how do we go about doing that? So the solution we developed uses nothing but core M365 capabilities. So that's part. There's other things you certainly could do using common data services and getting way more pro than we did. But we chose for this solution to stay entirely inside of SharePoint lists and Power Automate and Power App features that are included within the core M365 licenses, meaning a field.
So you're not any additional Power Platform licensing.
No, a field user. This solution as built, a field user, a frontline worker entitlement can run the solution and execute it. So we want to be very careful about this because it's designed to say, how do we get a voice from the field backwards, right? There are certainly Teams things that do that, or whatever it is, but this time we're trying to get some news. There's something a little magical about news pages and the promotion that we've all been doing around them, their ability for findability, promotability, and as I go through this series, we're going to be talking about that. All right, so here's our nice page. The goal, get more news on it. Right? Because right now, there's not a lot that didn't come from our corporate communications team. So if that's the goal is to produce a nice looking news page. I'm going to go ahead and just pop into site contents. I'm going to go into the site pages, and I'll show you one that we programmatically generated using this method. So you can see what I mean by a little bit of output on top of it. So if you notice down here, you see a 2020, 1023, and if I click on it, it says drone success in Minneapolis. And this page is only partially scaffolded out because this is our exercise that we're going to do. Now notice my template has little stories from the field image over here, and it's got some placeholders for text 1, section 1. Notice section 1 is filled out. The customer successfully used our new drone 2. Section 2 just has a little stuff, so it's all kind of blank, but the template is there. Think of this like a mail merge exercise, right? But a super nerdy one when it comes to SharePoint. Parts of this are going to be pro. Right? I mean, as far as setting it up, but the usability is not going to be. All right, so if we want to then programmatically have these nice structured pages with a banner up top, we want to make this thing look nice, we need the ability to gather this information in a consistent format and then do the merge and then dynamically custom top branding, the image maybe that came from that customer experience in the field, the content they submitted to us. And so what we decided to do is what's the best way in an app, right? So that's where the whole thing comes together. There's a Power App that drives a SharePoint list and a set of flows that run a business process to decide when and how to publish this content and also where to publish it and what metadata it should have and all the rest of the stuff. So let's break down the rest of the pieces and we'll sort of walk through it. But the goal is to be able to generate a really nice looking page. And as we go through the steps in this process over this week, next week, and probably the week after, this page is going to get better and better looking. But this is the core, the crawl/walk version to show you all the core tech that's involved. So Todd, you're my neutral reviewer. How am I doing on describing it so far?
I mean, B plus.
All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it. All right. So if we have this overall site, right, and we have site contents on it, you'll notice there's some lists in here. And the most important list on this particular page is this thing called pub content. I prefixed all my list names with pub and then put the list components below it. So if you're loading this solution in, if you follow the same naming taxonomy and you swap out that, you're unlikely to have a list called pub content, right? That you could deploy inside of your solution. But if you don't have one, you can load this thing in and literally swap out like your Power App references and stuff, delete the connector in the template, put this one in, and because the connection references aren't available everywhere. So if you're importing this today or later this afternoon when I publish it, you're gonna have to do a little tweaking. But I've tried to make that as tiny as possible to make the solution reusable. And when the references are released everywhere, then it'll be absolutely publishable. And that's what we can do, GitHub, DevOps, and all the rest of the stuff. All right, so here's the list. There's only a couple rows in it. And again, I made this list, and the schema for the list is out in the soon-to-be-published GitHub repo, but it's pretty simple. I have a workflow state column, the title, which is mandatory. I have an author column where I'm putting in who wrote this thing, participants, like who else was involved in it, and then I have generic buckets, text line 1, text line 2, choice 1, and choice 2. So let's dig in on the Minneapolis one that you can see right here. And you can see it's currently in state of staged, and we'll be using that a little more as we go through. There's a title, Drone Success in Minneapolis, the text line 2, shopping center expansion, the choice of Minneapolis, of construction, the rest of those things. Yep. If we go back around to our page that we had opened, and this is where you had too many pages open, so you lose track of which ones you're on. If we go back around to the page that we had open, if we go look at the page details, you should see on the details side that metadata for this particular page, Drone Success in Minneapolis build site, and there's the descriptor which came in from the template and stuff. But if you look on the properties, notice how the industry is already tagged with construction and the office is tagged with Minneapolis. Right. So what I did is I bound those things together inside of that list that is sitting right here. So these values essentially that came into the SharePoint list are now published over as a SharePoint news page, right? So now, because I've got this going, the list is the source of truth, the page is the destination, and the source is going to be a Power App. So this is where our schema is stored for our news stories. Because this is being published out, I just tried to make these labels generic. And then on your app or on your actual news page, you would then put whatever you want to use those for. If you check these ones out, and I'm going to change this real quick. I'm going to say edit all. And we're going to change this to test title. We'll just go to OFF. Actually, we'll do an edit all. Otherwise, it will. Well, that's actually going to trigger a run. So it'll be fine. We'll just use another one. So we'll do test title. So we'll get a couple of pages generated. Test title OFF. I don't know, 1052. We won't do anything participants. For title, I don't know. Todd is great. Okay.
Thank you.
And then notice there's some keyword stuff that'll be in a part of it. But if you come down to choice, notice how this one has a multi-select. You can have more than one city involved in it. All right. Now notice on the labeling, I only attached one primary city to it because I decided I only wanted to target it that way on the SharePoint side. But I wanted to show people how to parse a multi-valued SharePoint list item. So it's not only is it an example, it's the components show you how to do some complicated things. I also show how to parse out if someone added a custom image as an attachment. And we also showed just the basic one. So if you're only allowed to pick one, like for construction, manufacturing, and energy, you got that dynamic going on too. And then you come down here, I actually use the extended rich text blocks format for these. So you can have like a bulleted list or something else. So the body content doesn't just have to be static text. Make sense? You can put some formatting to that. So this lets the user, within the framework of, I've got section 1, section 2, section 3, put some nice stuff on top of it. Even if we're just in regular SharePoint mode, it's not too bad. But this is not a great UI I would hand to a user. Agreed?
So
just a data tool.
Do you mind if I jump in for a second?
No, not at all.
I'll derail you, but I have a few comments and questions.
Yeah.
So first, my comment. I'm listening to you. I've known about this solution, right? I've been a user of this solution, right? We use this at Microsoft for our NTC Stories tool internally. I've used this as a consumer of this. So the first thing that I just want to say is anyone that tells me citizen development isn't real, like that's just a wrong statement. Like, this is amazing. This is a full-featured content management system that you've built up over time.
Don't call it that. People get mad at me. It's a news publication tool.
Oh, did I use the wrong word?
No, it's fine. It's fine. It is. It's a miniature content publication flow.
But
100% correct.
This is amazing. Okay. So a question. So Nash in the comments was asking about if you did this with an F1 license. I don't think you. So this is F1?
Because all they're using is a Power App to submit the content, which is then running a SharePoint workflow on the SharePoint site, which is publication to a SharePoint site. Oh, yeah, man, that's all in. Power App on the flow.
The user of this can have an F1. You had to have something more than an F1, right, though, to build this?
I honestly think I probably, but I don't know. Does F1 have the ability to create a Power Automate?
Wow.
I will go double check. My guess is yes. My guess is it actually does. What's that?
Nash says slow clap in the chat. That's awesome.
I don't like to guess, so we will get an authoritative answer on that. But I know they can consume it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're going to have one knowledge worker that could set this up. I guess that's not a bad assumption.
My other comment / question here is, this is pretty full featured, right? You've talked about some of the things where you could customize and the tagging and all of that. You didn't start your V1 was not this.
No,
right?
sir, it was not. Yep.
You had an MVP, minimally viable product that did the bare bones framework of this. That
is
you
correct.
worked a actual real collaborative process where you had like a backlog and you process like a real software product, right?
Yeah.
But you weren't doing Java code, you weren't doing C#. This was all Power Automate and SharePoint. Did you use any other components besides those three things I just said?
No.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
So here we
let people like.
Yeah, no, it's good.
That's
okay,
amazing.
So we made those changes a couple seconds ago, and because this flow trigger, the publication flow that runs this thing triggers based off of actions in the SharePoint list with some filters. Now, by the way, notice these pages are not published. That's because we're going to add an approval part to this that will actually trigger the publication, or a pre-review stage. People say, we got it all ready. Do you want to do any final tweaks before it goes? Or you could have it automatically published. We will be showing people how to do that. So most people know it's like, well, it didn't publish. I did not want it to publish, right? Because we certainly can do that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is say, all right, so if there's our list that we have that drives this, and we're producing these pages, and this one just got produced. You saw in the page library that it said, hey, a few seconds ago we generated this page. So if you make changes to that list, the flow will trigger, it'll fire, and it'll generate a page. So how are we doing that? Like, what's the geek part that you're going to be doing? And it is this flow right here. What's that?
I'm just saying. I'm guessing Power Automate.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's the hardest part of this particular one. And notice I have named it Publish to SharePoint News Page. Now, there are a bunch of variables that get initialized in the beginning. These are holders because we have to loop through a lot, and there's a thing in Power Automate where you can't set a variable to concatenate with itself. So if we're appending things together, we have to do a composition and then an output. You'll see it in the code. That's the reason why there are so many variable declarations in this particular flow. Some are config-oriented. I chose not to make like a JSON file and import it, make it super advanced. It's variables and loops, and some complicated SharePoint REST calls, I will admit. Okay, so if you look down, there's a criterion here. It's only going to act on things that are staged, which means we can have our content management system push things through in sort of a sequence manner, right? If this happens, if it is staged up, then it's going to go ahead and get the time, do some time zone conversions, and then it's going to run through the choice operation and compose a string that represents those choice. It's then, this one's the multivariable one. Remember, you could choose more than one city, if you will. So this is where it ran through and said, all right, I'm going to assemble a string that has all the cities together. Since we had Irvine and Minneapolis, or Chicago and Irvine, it'll be Chicago, Irvine, right? I got to concatenate that together and turn it into something I can put on the page. Who participated? Todd Kidda and Doug Splinter from St. Louis and Minneapolis, right? Those are the kind of concatenation functions. So I gave you an example of one of those. I also gave you just a straight up one, and then a pretty advanced one that shows exactly how to strip the attachments and save them as SharePoint assets. So if you submitted a photo, that photo will automatically end up over in a folder with a unique ID attached to that article so that I can replace the right-hand side blurb photo with the photo Todd took from the field. Make sense?
Oh, yes,
so this is this little blurb right here that does that, and you can go break it down. Now, then what it's going to do is it says, all right, I have that news template I started with. The first thing it's going to do is copy the template, and then it's going to apply those metadata properties we talked about. So this is where it got. See how industry was populated? And we had text line 1, the title, and the rest of the stuff. So we're just grabbing variables from the SharePoint list, and we're updating the SharePoint news that we created from this copy template function right here, where we just said, hey, copy it over, copy it with a new name. Here's our template file, and we're going to copy it to this or another site. And this is pretty cool because that means you can have multiple of these and flexibly target publication to different sites for news. You don't just have to pick one. So this framework allows very flexible targeting if you wanted to as well. Now, what we're also going to do is, I've learned a lot of people, even if you ask them to not use special characters, back to the whole point you were chuckling about before, still use them. So I have an example in here of a really constructed replace function that gets rid of every special character I've found that people will use that shouldn't be in a file name in a website.
Nice.
So I call it the title clean function. You shouldn't have to do this because, you know, I put on my forums, please don't use any special characters. People ignore me.
Is endorsing this behavior.
What's that?
Well, I said Power Automate Desktop is apparently endorsing people to use.
Yeah. Okay. So then the last thing we do here is we send an HTTP request to SharePoint, and this is where we get a little nerdy and maybe it gets a little magic from a technology standpoint.
Advanced level part.
Yeah, so we're getting a little bit. This is where you would have needed some help to know how to do this. But once you have the recipe card, you don't need it anymore. So we're going to make a SharePoint API call. We're going to do a post, and essentially that page, the SharePoint news page, is nothing more than a JSON document, right? Like it's what it is. It's got a JSON payload in it, and therefore, through the SharePoint API, you can, using this little merge technique, you can update the contents of that SharePoint page. Now, I know we're probably going to run a couple minutes over, but I think it's worth finishing this portion of thing. So what this is essentially doing is saying, hey, look, I would like you to update these values: the publication date target, the file leaf reference, which is the actual file name you see, right? Because it got copied over as sample news page. That clean title file leaf reference, that's going to turn it into that nice formatted name you saw where it said 2020-10- whatever, and it becomes this unique name that's associated to the title that was submitted. This is where the clean title is important, because if you give me special characters, SharePoint will say, no, thank you, and your flow will fail.
No, thank you, yes.
Well, it does. Yeah. Now, there are two particularly nerdy parts of this JSON document that matter. Two other elements of this JSON array. The layout web parts content. This is the page layout, how the web parts are constructed on the page. There is a companion data part that goes with that, that is also on here. And I know it looks super intimidating, but it's not that bad. Once you get used to it, that has I'll see if I can find it, the canvas data content right here. So this is saying, all right, within that layout, this is the canvas data that is populated within the layout. And you'll notice I have a replace function, which is essentially that mail merge operation, that we'll click on it and we'll kind of skim over here to the side if we can. Yep. Notice how we're saying we're replacing the trigger body over there with what came in from text block 1. But I'm also doing one small thing. I can't just insert text block 1 because it's not going to merge well with the JSON. So you got to do a little bit of HTMLification, which is why I have this sort of sample replace function in here, which essentially says, find all the quotes and replace them with the HTML quote tagging so your JSON doesn't blow up on you. Make sense? Because otherwise you're going to merge this neat little text block in and it won't mesh in well with the rest of the canvas block. And so this function right here then gets called, this is what gets called, and the page rolls, right? So if we go back and we were to make one of those changes or go look at one of our other ones, the shopping center expansion, drone success in Minneapolis build site, successfully tested our new drone. This is all the layout, this layout of the pages. If you were to go edit the actual page, right? The page components would show the normal, well, I'll just go into it. There's nothing wrong. Now it's a normal page. This is the layout view you're seeing now with the columnar setup and the rest of the content and the elements that are on page. The canvas is what's updating the internal portions of it. So then this is how you do a template then. You go author a page in this view, you save it as a template, and then I have a different flow, which we don't have time to get into today, where you run that flow to get that XML content that you're going to copy over to the other part. This is why it's sort of a multi-stage demo and it simply can't be done in short bursts. I will also probably record a continuous walkthrough of every step, including the tenant provisioning when I get some time. But essentially, developer tenant, SharePoint list with some columns and choices in it, right? And a SharePoint list to drive it, and that kind of magic little merge of the content at the very end results in this unique publication framework and execution capability. And you can use this anywhere to generate any kind of page content or whatever. Now you have to know what you're doing in order to gather the elements needed for a page, right? The layout portions and the rest of it, manage the publish state. I mean, not to get too geeky, but can you take a guess as to what we're going to do if we want to change the publish state to something different? Right? We're going to rotate the promoted state value, right? Or the publish state value. And we're going to change these things to different value, and we're just going to make these REST calls to submit. So this is the basic version of the flow, and it really is kind of simple. When things get added to the SharePoint list, initialize some variables, assemble some strings, take a sample page, merge it all together, and trigger off of it. The last part, we have a specific Power App that we built, and we'll dive in a little more on this in the next coming week, that says, how do I get a story in? So let's go ahead and play this one, and this is where I will end for the week. See how we have a little field customer story tool? We go new story, and then I have this nice looking, I think I clicked on the button. I did. I have just a very basic scaffolded field customer story tool. And all this is doing, Todd, is doing what? Adding to the SharePoint list.
Yep.
Right? But here I've got the title, the customer name, the author, the participants. I could rename this to photos. Here's my choices, right? There's Minneapolis, Chicago. There's my industry component on top of it. There's my text blocks that were merged in. So if I hit that save button, off she goes, and we'll get a new page generated.
This looks very familiar. This is awesome.
Yeah. So this entire thing was kind of built up in order to give you a good example of it. All these components will be out there. The flow should be landing in GitHub either today or tomorrow for sure on the ak.ms/dougcode. All right.
What? Well, I'm sorry. What did you say just there?
Where's I said it's on my aka.ms/dougcode.
Got it.
Yeah,
Got it.
And I'll put it in the show notes for publication.
To get to your GitHub, so that's great. Doug code. That's awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Cool.
So that was it. There's the core overview of the solution, and the first part of your lesson is to set up these assets, get a site where you want to publish some news to. Get a SharePoint list set up with this content, build the app, and those artifacts will be out there so you can start following along sometime over the weekend. And then next week, we're going to dive in a little more on the app and on how we generated that XML content. So we're going to demystify that confusing looking box, because it's not. It's just a bunch of HTML, and you're gonna put your own words in. You're going to search for them, and you're just going to replace them with variables. It's fancy mail merge. And so we're going to show people how to construct those elements and make sure they do the right things there. And then you'll have a working knowledge of how to be very dangerous on SharePoint page updates.
Man, that is the power of the Power Platform.
It wasn't very roadmappy today, but this is one of those things where I think knowing how to do this really opens your mind as to the power, like you talked about, of the citizen development capabilities in the platform. So I wanted to go super nerdy this week.
And not only that, but what blows my mind here, and maybe we've talked about this before, is you can build a whole life cycle around this thing. So you talk about the functionality and how you architected the app, but the operations of it, the monitoring of it, the deployment of it from like a dev environment to a test environment to a prod environment, like all that is totally doable.
I know.
Even in development.
And we have a search. There's a search one. There's a sharing tool we're going to build out together. There's a newsletter generation tool that we'll build out that drives it. All the telemetry then goes into a Power BI dashboard, so you can see who's opening what news articles from where. If you can bring your audit logs, Corey Buzzle has done this amazing sort of visibility as to comms linkages. There's all this amazing stuff that you get this holistic view of how is communications coming from us to the field, what assets are being used, and what do people want to do. All right, Absolutely. We're 7 minutes long, but hopefully that was useful to walk through it. And even if it wasn't, it was fun for me to geek out.
It was great. Nice work, Doug.
All right, so we're back next week. You're going to do a demo
yes.
next week, and I'll maybe do mine real quick, and then probably post a longer video asynchronously, just so we can, people can spend a little more time on the lesson if they want to.
Cool. All right. Well, everyone, have a great weekend. Have a safe weekend, and we'll see